Hello, this is Arielle Guttman. This is my YouTube channel and Venus Star Point official. And today I have a guest with me, one of my Venus Star trained teachers and practitioners named Victor Briere. And he comes to us from Italy. I'm in Greece, so we're not too far away, but we're still on Zoom. And Victor, it's really nice to have you. And I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time. I'll let Victor tell you about himself, but he practices Vedic astrology, which is more formally known as Jyotish. And I'm a Western astrologer. So we're going to be looking at Venus, the Venus star point, and actually just general ideas about the chart interpretation through the two different lenses of astrology, Jyotish and modern Western. So, Victor, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, thanks, Ariel. Happy to be chatting with you. So I am an Ayurvedic doctor, and I got into Jyotish a long time ago, about 7 years ago, simply because I was fascinated by astrology. I didn't understand it. I actually was mildly skeptical of astrology, but more curious than skeptical. And the skepticism quickly got dissolved when I met some great astrologers and they kind of talked me through how it really works, as opposed to my assumption that maybe, it's just horoscopes in the newspaper or something like that. So I got into astrology and then got into medical Vedic astrology to complement my Ayurvedic practice. For the listeners who don't know what Ayurveda is, it's a holistic system of medicine from India originally. And I studied that for multiple years. And then I had the pleasure of meeting you, Arielle. And I was really fascinated by all the connections you made with the planet Venus, which in Jyotish is called Shukra, or the sweet one.
Hmm.
And
Sounds like
especially
sounds like sugar or
it is.
sucra.
Yeah, it's one of the
Okay.
roots of sugar, the word sugar. I'm sure it's somewhere
Okay.
in Greek and Latin and
Okay.
all. Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, and so I became fascinated by how we could read Venus more in depth in a chart because, when I was doing readings for people, even beyond the medical aspect, the questions were mostly the same. Where is my passion in career? Where is my passion in relationship? And what's my ultimate fulfillment that I'm not feeling right now? Can you help me find it? And so
That is
Jyotish,
so that is so consistent with my experience too. And I talk about it and wrote about it that basically what it comes down to is almost every client comes in with questions that eventually lead you to Venus, the
absolutely.
idea of what Venus represents in the chart.
Right. And so when I met you, Ariel, and then when you talked to me about the system of analyzing Venus, I kind of was like, oh no, it's a Western technique. And I practice Jyotish. But then I sat down for a minute and thought, it's like, well, what's the problem? So just apply it to the Eastern system, right?
Right.
And not all techniques in astrology translate. Um, but because basically with the Venus star point, it's just about tracking Venus in the Jyotish chart in the same exact way you would track it in a Western chart. It's just that there's a
Mhm.
degree difference. It's not a problem. I found I was able to use the technique. And even though the signs might be called by different names, the interpretation usually wound up to be pretty much the same.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. So,
Call me by many names, but I am the same.
yeah, exactly. Right. And so that was wonderful. And I started using it when people would come and they're, almost, really longing for an understanding of what you and I know Venus represents. When they say those key words, it's like, oh, they're talking about their Venus influences in their life.
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
I find that too. So, yeah, and for the listeners, the simple calculation is just that when was Venus and the Sun, when was the last time Venus and the Sun were cazimi, or more commonly known as conjunction, because the star points are based on the conjunctions of Venus, which happen approximately every 9 months. And every other one is a retrograde Venus. So you get a conjunction where Venus is direct, and then 9 months later you get the conjunction where it's retrograde, and then conjunct and retrograde. And that's the Venus synodic cycle, the two Venuses, the morning star Venus, the evening star Venus, based on the superior conjunction and the inferior conjunction, which happens. I don't know if Jyotish has a distinction between the two different conjunctions. Do they look at that in terms of, when Venus is on the far side of the sun in conjunction, or when it's closest to the Earth?
No, not that I'm aware of. With astrology, as you know, it's like I don't know of it, but then I'll go meet a person who's developed or discovered a whole technique based around just that in Jyotish in
Yeah,
some
yeah,
obscure text somewhere.
yeah,
But to my knowledge, no. But what I have found is that a lot of times in the Western system, they'll come to understand a phenomenon using the planets as the signs or the positions of the planets as a sign, and it'll describe a specific phenomenon or have a certain meaning. And we derive the same exact meaning, but we look at just a different look at we observe the sign in a different way. So, like for example, in Jyotish, we don't necessarily look at what side of the sun Venus is on. Um, but there's like a difference between retrograde, sorry, excuse me, combustion and Cassini,
yeah.
that can
I'd
often.
like to ask you a little bit more about that combustion and cazimi, because Venus retrograde can only happen when Venus is combustion or pretty close to combustion. It's going to be really, really close, because
Right.
it separates from the sun, it pulls away from the sun, only it gets so far away from the sun, and then it has to start moving back again. And so in that moving back, it's getting into the combustion area, what is your degree, or do you have a degree marker that says this is combustion? Like some Western astrologers will say 10 degrees is combustion, or 12 degrees. Do you have the same designation?
Yeah, in Jyotish, it's based on the planet, actually, how close to the sun it needs to be. So, like Mercury
Okay.
has the highest degree of separation as being considered combust. Venus is second most. So Venus has about a 10-degree orb where it's
Okay.
considered combust. And combustion in Jyotish is about purification of that energy, of the Venusian energy. So the closer Venus gets to the sun, the more quote unquote combust it is. And that intensifies the purification specifically of desire. So how we read that in a chart is as Venus approaches the sun and gets really close, the person is going through this process of taking what they think their desire might be at a surface, and it's getting the fluffs getting burnt off of it so that they understand what their actual real desire is. And that happens at the point of Cassimi.
Right.
You learn the truth about what you're actually longing for, or you have
Hmm.
an opportunity to. We could say there might be other factors in the chart that keep that obscured, but that's the idea, because oftentimes it's like, okay, I go outside, I want to eat a candy bar. That's my desire. So on a surface level, we could say Venus is involved in that, just as an example. But come on.
Sugar.
Yeah, exactly. That's not really it. That's not what I'm really
No, no.
passionately longing for in my heart,
Yeah.
right? So the combustion process is going through from the candy bar to, longing for the love of my parent, to longing for the love of the divine, to finding that in the core of my heart would be the cazimi moment. And that's all shades of gray with Venus.
Oh, okay. That is such a great definition. Um, Thank you for illuminating that for us. I'll tell you, I heard from a Vedic astrologer quite a number of years ago when I first began working with Venus, that, and if I wish I could remember who said that, I would definitely give that person credit, but I can't remember. But I don't know if that was just that person's idea or whether it was a kind of a interpretation in Jyotish. But uh, the idea was that when a planet is combustion the sun, it's as if the sun is the king and the king is in the throne room and all of his subjects are in that room around him, and nobody's actually paying attention to the subjects because even though they're close to the king, they're within 10 degrees. Okay. um, they Who's going to pay attention to them? They're all looking at the king. But if the king singles out one person in the crowd and says, "Here, come with me, come sit next to me, come be by my side, come be my partner, come be with me," then that is like cazimi. Then that person gets all the light and all the attention that the king has bestowed, or the queen. You could say the queen on the throne too, the king or the queen, but the one. And we see that in celebrity culture a lot. We definitely see that. And I've seen it in the royal marriages where one of the royals marries someone and is more or less cazimied or eclipsed by the partner. The partner comes in, that person has all the attention. For instance, King Charles, when he was Prince Charles, Diana came into the picture and suddenly all eyes were on Diana. So she in effect eclipsed him or cazimied him. And a similar thing happened when Harry married Meghan. All the attention was on Harry, and then Meghan comes into the picture, and now, she's pretty much, I mean, I don't think she's eclipsed him totally because he's definitely has influence of his own and interest by, people in the media of his own. But the same sort of thing happened in the beginning. But I thought that was a good description because we're really looking at the cazimi of Venus to the sun when we're looking at the star points. And so that is when the divine one, whether you call it, the Holy One or the representation of the Holy One on earth or whatever it is, brings this idea of the sweetness, this presence of, because really Venus, we can't say that Venus is totally just about love. Venus has a very wide spectrum of energies that she inhabits and projects outwardly to people. But one of the things I think with the star point is because it's an inner kind of thing. It's not so much the planet Venus going around your chart and where it lands. It's more like the sun in Venus before you were born, and that cosmic kiss or cazimi that influences you when you're in the womb. And it's like it connects the cosmic heart center to your heart, and it resonates throughout your life.
Yeah, that's I think well, it's a really deep way of looking at, what Venus means in a chart. Like, how's an astrologer supposed to understand Venus? And, most superficial understanding is, oh, Venus has to do with love and desire and, scandal, whatever. Far from it, right? Well, the way you described it was beautiful because that cosmic kiss that is happening in the womb is what we would call in Jyotish, how the divine has organized a person's dharma or special path that only they can walk in this life. And that desire is placed, you could say, quote unquote, inside the native. We call the individual we're reading the native in Jyotish. It's placed inside the native's heart. They're supposed to desire to walk towards their purpose in life.
Right,
And the way we read that in a Jyotish chart is two ways. One is through Venus, and the other is through what's called the Atma Karaka, or the soul indicator. And that could be any planet. But you always have to look at Venus no matter what. So
right.
I think, yeah, that's a really
Hmm.
important understanding of Venus in astrology. It's not just about sexy love romance stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I like what you said earlier about the idea that when Venus is retrograde, it's about purification, because Venus spends an average of 40 days in retrograde whenever every 1.6 years. And we know that 40 days is sort of a metaphor. It appears in the Bible, both the Old and New Testament. It appears in Islam. And I live in Greece, in the Greek Orthodox Church. There are many ceremonies that take place 40 days after a certain thing happens, like after a person dies, after a person is born. There are 40-day periods. The period of Lent, of course, is 40 days. And what is Lent supposed to, I think most Westerners are familiar with Lent. What is Lent supposed to represent? The 40 days before Easter.
The
So
purification
it's that
desire, right?
withholding of sweets, it's withholding of that which we desire the most, um, to more or less go through that purification process. Or you could liken it to the metaphor of the 40 days that Jesus spent in the desert, which is another way of saying, whether it's fasting or purifying or praying or meditating or whatever you want to say, but cleansing, kind of cleansing the bodily function in order to get closer to spirit. And so I do feel that there is a strong resonance with that. And also because for the Venus cycle, when Venus is going into retrograde, she is moving back to becoming, um, with the sun. She's ready to join the sun. And so before she joins the sun, it's as if she's in preparation or readying herself to be in, that divine presence.
Absolutely. Yeah, the 40-day thing is amazing. And like with the 40 days in the desert, it's a perfect story. It's a Venus story, right? Like people wouldn't normally think of it that way, but that's what it was, because look at what Jesus was asked to do. He was asked to clarify intention against temptation. That's exactly what when Venus is in Pisces, it's exalted in Jyotish. I know it's the same in Western or tropical zodiac. That's exactly, and Jesus was very Piscean in his Venusian energy. So it's the story of that exaltation. How do you get Venus to express its highest qualities instead of its more base qualities, which there's nothing wrong with, but it's not going to get you to the highest qualities.
Right, exactly. That's really something to be thinking about. We should be having this discussion before Easter, but here we are.
Exactly,
Yeah,
right?
maybe I'll put this up again when it comes to that time of year. But the other thing is that Jyotish, to me, I've dipped my toe into it a little bit because I lived in Santa Fe, New Mexico for 35 years, and there were many, many Jyotish practitioners there, many, many Ayurvedic practitioners and clinics and healers. And so I learned a bit of the terminology and the lingo, and I understand a very tiny bit, but it feels to me that it is that um, that traditional Western astrology or Hellenistic astrology um, is more in alignment with the idea of Jyotish in terms of their interpretation and how, where these meanings come from, that they're tied together at some point. And I know back in history they were tied together at some point. I know the caravans traveling back and forth between Egypt and Greece and the Middle East and all of that, they were sharing, you know, there were astrologers, there were philosophers, there were religious teachers, etc. They were sharing stories and ideas. And so there was some cross-pollination there at the time. And what developed eventually into modern, into Western astrology, ancient Western, and then took a big leap forward in, I would say, probably the last couple of centuries, modern Western astrology, which is where I came into it. But modern Western seems less related to Jyotish than, you know, the traditional ancient Western, in terms of a lot of things. Do you take a, I feel that I have heard from Jyotish astrologers that they put a lot of weight on rulership, debilities, dignities, exaltations, etc., malefics, benefics, and that has carried over into Western as well. But I think less so in modern Western. There's been a kind of departure from wanting to interpret a chart that way. But in traditional Western, there's definitely still, you will find that, you know, all those designations exist. So rather than tackling that whole subject, because that's another whole subject,
Yeah.
is just with Venus. Do you consider Venus, for instance, in Libra, in Taurus, in Pisces, as highly dignified?
Yeah, so dignity is an important concept in Jyotish. It's one way you understand the strength of the planet's indicated influence on the native. So what does that mean? That's a lot of words. Okay, in Jyotish is considered, it's called the science of light. That's what it means. And it considers the sky as an omen, as to what's going on inside people, in the world, all that stuff. So the planets are called in Sanskrit graha. Graha means to have a hold over or to grab. And the idea is that depending on when a native is born, and then all their, you know, you could also look at the current sky, but let's just keep it simple. Depending on when the native's born, it gives an imprint, like the Venus star, right? It
Mhm.
gives an imprint in the native about what kind of holds that native is going to have to deal with during their life. And in the Jyotish system, that's all karma, all of it. And karma is neither good nor bad. It's simply a natural influence that the native has created in multiple incarnations for themselves.
So
So
you would say karma not being good or bad is sort of just like the result. It's
exactly,
it's just the result of what you did before.
right.
Like, if you invested $20,000 in a fund that went bankrupt, the karma is that you're broke
Lost
because you
$25,000. Right,
invested. So is
right.
that good or bad? It's bad because you lost your money, but it's good because maybe you'll never fall for that kind of scheme again.
Exactly. So everything in Jyotish is oriented towards the Atma Karaka, what the soul needs to learn in order to develop in this life. That's what, so if we're going to even call something good or bad, which very hesitant to do, but if we were, it is in the context of how the soul is learning. That's the Jyotish philosophy. And so exactly like what you said, oh no, I lost $25,000. What a horrible curse upon my name, you know? But actually, you know, in that process, they learn a lesson and then that brings them down this path and then that path. And before you know it, they learned what they need to learn. So
Right.
was it bad that they lost $25,000? No, you know, they learned what they need to learn in the end. Um,
And
Same thing.
actually, what I see with Venus coming up is less about, I'm not working so much with financial astrology and people that have, although I have had clients that have had that happen, but more frequently, and I'm sure you've heard this too, that karma shows up in relationship because over and over and over again, it's the person asking, why am I why do I keep winding up with with the same person? Why
Right.
do I keep having to go through this again and again and again? So,
Yeah, exactly. So Venus pointing out, it's like there's a lesson that one needs to learn in relationship, and if they don't learn it, that basically it's going to repeat. The karma of it will repeat. And that is
right.
one meaning of retrograde, and why retrograde has so much to do with Venus and purification, because that's where people repeat themselves most often is in the relationship realm. Uh,
Hmm. Right.
so retrograde indicates that something needs to be, in Jyotish, indicates that something needs to be repeated multiple times before it's finally understood. And then once understood, the lesson is more solid inside them than it ever was. But
Hmm.
they had to walk around the block a few times to really get it.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So Venus goes retrograde less frequently than, let's say, the outer planets go retrograde almost half of the year,
Mhm.
every year. So that's a more common thing where so many people are born with that condition. But when we look at Mercury and Venus and Mars, the inner planets, they go retrograde less frequently. And so their retrogrades are basically what you're saying is an opportunity to um, look at that pattern, maybe much more in a much more focused way.
Yeah, and retrograde creates the way it's described in Jyotish is it's like a slingshot. It creates a lot of tension, right? And so there's that like feeling inside the person. Um, and well, okay, just to clarify, in Jyotish, we wouldn't say that the planet is creating the tension. What we would say is that the planet, as an omen, is indicating that nature has this mode of operation that creates tension at certain times for people. We want to be very clear in Jyotish not to blame the planet. Venus,
Right. Same in
planet,
Western. We don't
yeah,
blame the planet.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Venus, the
Yeah.
planet, isn't doing anything to you.
Yeah.
It's
It's
indicating
like
a
blaming the
natural cycle.
sky for raining,
Yeah,
It's
exactly, right? Yeah,
like, it's raining. It's your fault.
yeah,
You ruined my day, you know.
exactly. So that
Um,
tension is uncomfortable, but it's important in our evolution process. So a lot
mhm.
of people say, "Oh no, Mercury retrograde." It's like, no, Mercury retrograde provides an opportunity to do a lot of work around, just in general communication. But you got to look at
Right.
someone's chart to know exactly what it means.
Exactly, exactly. So this is it's just I've got so many ideas spinning and popping in my head. This is such a great conversation. I love this. I could go on forever with this, but I'm aware of time, so we'll move on. But one thing I just kind of had a realization of, even though I've probably interpreted it that way for many years, is that when the planet is retrograde, it's going a different way than the normal flow of all the rest of the planets.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so it's going a different way means you are basically, the stream is flowing this way and you're rowing against the stream. But
Mhm.
why are you rowing against the stream? And when you said tension, there is a certain tension with that, because you have to work harder to row against the stream. But if you want to get out of the way, let's say, again, no good, no bad, if you want to release yourself from the way the sheep are going and everybody's going this way, you might be one who wants to row against the stream because it may be harder for you on one hand, but it may be sort of a divine destiny for you to find your path by going that way, going another way.
Yeah, and resistance and flow, the clockwise, counterclockwise flow are all
Right,
natural forces. There's not one of the, it's weird to describe them as right or wrong, but a lot of people do
right,
even thinking about it. And
right.
they misinterpret what their chart means. So I do feel like it's an astrologer's job to help people understand. It's like, no, natural resistance in nature is part of how we develop our inner resources, we could say.
Right,
And
right,
especially with Venus, right? Because what's the classic romantic thing? Like the partner meets resistance in order to prove to the beloved that it's real. So with Venus, it's like when Venus meets this resistance in this combustion, especially in the combustion process, it's like you're tempering your desire into the reality of what it is on a soul level. And that's the only thing that's going to fulfill us anyways. So, while it's often laced with suffering and struggle, that's okay, you know?
right, right.
Yeah. So I
And I'm
think,
often fond of saying to a person when Venus is retrograde in the sky, whether or not they have it in their natal position or not, is that this is a time, this 40-day period, to evaluate, to look at your values, but especially around relationships. But that relationship can be to anything. What are you highly invested in? Is it your work? Is it your love? Is it your whatever it is that you're invested in, that you're doing, putting, all of your resources and energy into? The retrograde is a time to step back and say, take a pause and let yourself feel what it's like to understand what value it does have in your life, and is it still of value to you the way it was when you first began it, and that sort of thing. So it's a reevaluation time, you know.
yeah, absolutely. In Jyotish, if someone's struggling with something and we look at their chart and there's either a significant transit or it's significant in their birth chart, and we're dealing with retrograde, and they're wondering whether they should stop or keep going, almost always the answer is keep going, especially with retrograde. It's like this is not a wall. It's just resistance, and you got to keep going. If you give up, you're gonna have to repeat it next time.
Right. And right
Yeah,
now, I mean, we're recording this in September of 2024. Um, the last cazimi of Venus and the Sun was when it was not retrograde. And it's an evening star right now. But next March 2025, it will be retrograde. Venus will go retrograde in Western in the sign of Aries, probably in Pisces for
nice.
Jyotish,
Yeah,
which is its exalted place in Jyotish. So you're going to have a different interpretation. In Western, it the Aries is not its strongest sign for Venus, but the Venus star point has been appearing in Aries since the 1920s and has a 100-year cycle of every 4 years coming back to Aries, 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 Aries every 4 years. So my feeling about the Aries star point in general has been, look at how the feminine has developed and evolved in the last almost 100 years. How the strength and the power. It was only when the Venus star point came into Aries in the 1920s that women actually got the right to vote in America. And so going from the right to vote to 100 years later to we now have a female presidential nominee, um,
right.
is a very big leap. It's a very big leap in a 100-year period. And maybe you can say this about all kinds of things in the technological world as well, but this I think is a really big thing. And last summer, 2023, we had the Venus retrograde in Leo. And so we're between the two Venus retrogrades now. We're in a space where Venus is direct. You see her in the evening sky, but starting next February, March, Venus is gonna go below the horizon and then come back out again, get combust, and then cazimi, and then suddenly will rise in the morning sky as the morning star. So that was the thing I was asking you about before, but you said you don't have any general feelings in Jyotish about that, whether Venus is in front of the sun or behind the sun in terms of in the chart.
Yeah, not that I'm aware, but honestly, seriously, I would not be surprised if it is recorded in the Jyotish text and I just don't know about it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we
Yeah.
have a lot of, I mean, think they have thousands and thousands of pages of recordings of,
Yeah.
astrological interpretations and omens. So we can't, you same in Western, we can't possibly know them all. But
No.
yeah, there might be, but you probably have enough to work with that it's okay.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
wanted
There's
to
no
show,
shortage.
you gave us an example of a chart. I want to share my screen and with you all. And let's see, here it is. Give me a moment here to, here it is. Um, okay. Oh, I have to share the screen. You're not seeing the screen yet, are you? Okay.
Not yet, not yet.
Okay, let me go back to that. Share, share. Um, okay, so now can you see that now?
Yes.
Okay, so you gave me an example of somebody you're working with who was born April 18th, 1969. It is a female, 1:50 p.m., San Francisco, California. And I
Right.
wanted to show the Western chart first because I think most of our viewers are going to be more familiar with this, looking at the chart this way. And so just to point out that the sun is at 28 Aries here, Venus is at 12 Aries retrograde, and the Venus star point at birth was 18 Aries, meaning they've already made their conjunction. In fact, this person was born on the 18th of April, and the cazimi of Sun and Venus was the 8th of April that year. So she was born only 10 days after. And I have to say, what synchronicity this is. We didn't plan this at all. I didn't even know we were going to use a chart. I didn't know what chart you were going to provide for me. But today, while we're recording this, the sun is at, Venus is at 18 degrees of Libra. And this person's star point is 18 degrees Aries.
Perfect.
So
Yeah.
again, you can't make this stuff up, but here it is. So of course I would have a lot to say to a person looking at this chart from the Western point of view, but I want to show them how it looks from the Jyotish point of view. And what are we looking at here? It's all Greek to me.
Yeah, exactly, right? Just like the other one's Greek to me. So
Right.
yeah, just to orient a little bit. So basically, dead center of this square is considered the native or individual we're talking about. And then the square is a representation of the sky around the native. And then all the symbols, all the red symbols you see are planets. We're just going to ignore the blue symbols for now.
Okay.
So it's all in Sanskrit abbreviations. But if you look at the center of the square and then look to the left on the screen, you see LG. That's the lagna or ascendant. So this person's ascendant, that's Cancer in that box right there.
Okay. And how do we know that's Cancer?
Because the signs are fixed in this manner of chart reading. So
Okay.
each box or triangle represents a sign of 30
Okay.
degrees.
So
Yeah.
Cancer's always there in that left-hand position?
Answer is always in that left-hand position in this style of chart. There are
Okay.
Jyotish charts where the houses are, sorry, the ascendant dictates what's on top of the chart, and then it changes based on the ascendant. But in this one, it's the ascendant that moves around a fixed square.
Okay.
Yeah. So Cancer is always on the left there, which means Capricorn's always on the right. Aries is at the top, which is where
Mm-hmm.
that SA meaning Saturn.
Mm-hmm.
Um, So that's Aries, and then right across from Aries is Libra. And so between those, you can understand where all the signs are.
Okay.
Yeah. So
So
from
first of all, we have cardinal signs in angular houses or cardinal houses. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. So okay, so obviously in this case, we're looking at Venus and the sun. And so we look at, just to orient ourselves, we see that Saturn we know is in Aries, and then right before Aries comes Pisces.
Hmm.
So that's where Venus is. Venus is that SK with an underline, meaning Shukra. Shukra is the Sanskrit word for Venus, and the
Right.
underline means it's retrograde.
Okay. The underline
And,
means it's retrograde. Okay.
and you have Buddha, which is Mercury, which is the BU. The sun is there, Surya, it's the same abbreviation as the sun. And Rahu is the north node, RA.
Hmm.
So I mean, I know in Western too, 4 planets in one sign is a lot to deal with. And
Yes.
you've got Venus dead on the sun in this.
Yes.
And not
Okay.
only that, you have Mercury dead on the sun. So there's a double cazimi going on.
Wow.
Right. So this is like an astrologer's dream and nightmare all at once. It's like, how the heck do I interpret this? Right. Like
Yeah.
this is
So we've
either,
been
yeah,
there. We've all been
yeah,
there.
right. It's like, whoa, this is something really cool, but what do I even know that I'm looking at? But
Exactly.
obviously, this is a very unique imprint.
Right.
Um, so there's, so we look at the native and and also the sun, that AK next to the sun shows that the sun is the Atma Karaka, the most important planet in a Jyotish chart. That's showing that the native needs to learn on a soul level lessons around power and authority and leadership. That's the main purpose of their life.
And
So
where's that? Atmakaraka?
it's designated by the AK next to the SU,
Okay.
right? So, and that's because the sun is the highest degree planet in the chart.
Mm.
It's at the Atmakaraka.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you would exclude whatever that AL in blue is and the Lagna that's 27.
Yeah. Lagna is not a planet. AL is not a planet. Those are other calculations. Uh,
Okay. And PL underline.
PL is Pluto, which cannot be the Atmakaraka. Even,
Okay.
of course, it's a planet. Yeah.
So you're only using the 7 traditional
Correct.
planets.
You
Okay.
got it. Right. Those are the only ones eligible for Atmakaraka.
Okay. So
Yeah.
Atmakaraka, say that again. What is its meaning?
Atma means soul, personal soul.
Okay.
Uh, Karaka means indicator. So the literal
Okay.
translation is indicator of the soul.
Okay. So that would be the sun in this case.
In this chart, in another chart, it's going to be a different planet.
Right. But in this chart, so having a double cazimi of Mercury and Venus on the sun in this chart, what are you saying to this person? And of course, obviously, we don't say things without having the question asked first. So, what might be the question of this person if she has come to you for, if you can share that even?
Right. Yeah, sure. Of course. So this person's question was regarding her career, which was more than a career, obviously. And when you hear the story, it'll make sense. So she had to make some really big decisions around whether she was going to quit or continue her current job. She is a lawyer and she left the corporate law world to work for a Native American tribe that was fighting a huge legal battle to get resources because their tribal lands were basically in bad shape. And it was surrounding oil and things like that. And there were lots of complexities about what was going to happen to their land. And this tribe was being threatened with being completely displaced and basically kicked out.
Mm.
In very
Sounds like
subversive.
that movie that came out last summer, the
Yeah.
Killers of the Flower Moon.
Yeah.
They
And,
just
it was
oil on the Osage land. Yeah.
exactly, it was happening in all these subversive ways. There's a lots of politics. There's a lot of manipulation and betrayal and trust issues. That is in Jyotish signified by the North Node being conjunct with the Sun.
Hmm.
Rahu can cause those kinds of, or indicate those kinds of problems. Conjunct with the Sun, Atmakarika is showing that on a deep level, this person needs to resolve issues around trust, betrayal, manipulation, lying, seeing through the shadows, all that stuff, right? And
Right.
she's to an extreme. And she's been doing this and she's at a point of breaking down. I mean, she was at a point of falling apart because it was so stressful. And she's trying to help the native community. And they, are wondering if she's really on their side. And there's just no one knows what's going on, right?
Hmm.
Everyone's not untrustworthy of everyone else. And and so she's trying to reach this place inside of like, no, look, my intention's pure. I really want to help and help them resolve this. And I don't know whether to continue, even though there are these problems even between me and them, because there's just so many seeds of deceit being sown. Or do I quit or do I go all the way? Right. So that's
Right.
what question. So we look at the chart and we say, look, given this situation, all the communication is going to be shrouded in this Rahu and energy. Your soul is saying you're going to be extremely challenged in a leadership power position, right? And so it's
Right.
not a surprise that you're going through these extreme trials.
Right.
Uh, and that other leadership is going to be acting in a very corrupt way. We can see that all happening. That energy is just at play. But
Right.
look, your Venus is here and it's being purified to the utmost extent. And your desire is to help this community. And that is a pure desire. That's the heart of your desire. And the retrograde aspect of it is showing that you're going to meet a lot of resistance, like a
Hmm.
lot, internal and external. And you need to go all the way, right? This is a case where at least I would advise the native to take it all the way to the end, regardless of the outcome. Because if they
Right.
don't, Venus will not quote unquote be purified all the way, and they're going to cycle into the same lesson
Right.
next.
Well, I was going to ask you that. So, would your advice be in the face of these hardships? Would you say, okay, just let go and release and you know, let the cosmic forces take care of it? Or would you tell her to keep pushing through?
Well, both. She does need to surrender. I mean, that's always an important aspect. Surrender to the outcome. But
Yes.
she, as an
Right.
individual, can't walk away. I mean, she could, but if she
Hmm.
did, the karma would remain intact. The purification process would not be complete because this is not just some lesson on the side. This is the lesson of her life being reflected in the external,
Right.
right?
Right.
So forget the characters and the cast of characters, whether it's cowboy. I mean, it's literally cowboys versus Indians in this example. I mean, whether it's cowboys and Indians or whatever, it's going to show up again if she doesn't complete this Atma Karika lesson.
Right.
That would be the Jyotish way of looking at it. And then,
And the effect of Venus being retrograde here really plays into this.
mm, big time, the fact that it's retrograde is showing this hard struggle,
Hmm.
all this
She's,
tension,
and
right?
again, she's going against the flow, the
Right.
retrograde. And
Exactly.
and I didn't mean to say that when the retrograde going against the flow, we don't always want to go with with the way things are flowing. We sometimes do want to go in another direction, but that's a literal example of it. I always think of labyrinths. Labyrinths were constructed, I have been told, as a visualization of the planets, in the sky, as above, so below. And when you're going through a labyrinth, sometimes you're going this way, and then suddenly you come to a turning point, and then you go back this way, and you think, oh, I'm not getting anywhere. I'm going back. but then suddenly it turns again and you're going forward, and then you're going back again and then forward. And this is the movement of how everything works in the sky.
No, I didn't know that. That's fascinating. But yes, it is like a
I
labyrinth.
studied labyrinths for
Yeah.
for a while back in another lifetime, which was about 20 years ago.
Wow. I didn't even know there was a study of labyrinths.
Yeah, I had a partner at that time who was building labyrinths
Oh,
and built
wow.
one on our property. And we were both engaged in just kind of, what does a labyrinth mean? What is it all about? And so, yeah,
So yeah, she's in the labyrinth of this and coming to the center, and the choice she's faced with, because in Jyotish, the native always has a choice, except in very rare circumstances. So she has a choice to complete this karma or not, and basically either uphold the pure desire of the what Venus is asking her to do, which is, by the way, we can't answer the question, well, how do we know her pure desire? Well, Venus is the way we look at it in Jyotish is Venus is exalted in Pisces. So she's looking to bring peace to the land. That's where her true love is in this situation. But then there are all these other forces pushing and pulling on that. And so,
right. And Pisces is such a compassionate sign too. She really, really deeply feels she wants to help this
exactly,
situation and
exactly,
the tribe, and possibly not just the tribe, could be any people anywhere, but the land itself,
right.
like bringing peace to the land, to the earth. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is in this story, she did continue and she did win.
wonderful. That's a good
Yeah.
example. Just quickly, because I know we've gone on a little bit longer than maybe we thought we were going to, but I want to go back to her Western chart in terms of some of the striking correspondences. The first thing, and I just looked at this chart like 5 minutes before we began today, our session, so I haven't really had time to study this, but I would say some of the overriding influences here for me in this chart are that really Saturn is cazimi, her sun. And when you talk about being consumed by work, I mean, this is how I would interpret it, that you are consumed by work and by it more or less takes over you. You don't, and that's what I think a very close combustion to cazimi. It's almost cazimi. It's almost within a degree there, just short of a degree, would be. And also having Sun Saturn, having the talent and the skill and the ability, the knowledge to do something, to provide a leadership role, and to make decisions and to have influence. So I think that's good. The sun is exalted in Aries by the way that we use exaltations. However, Saturn is not. Saturn is considered in not its strongest sign, but yet she is surrounded by forces around her. So I think in the end, I would say, because her sun is exalted and Saturn is not, it's in a weaker sign to what it needs, even though she has the threat of all these monsters around her, or evil people, or, trying to discredit her or whatever. She's probably going to come out on top eventually, but it takes a lot of perseverance. Just having a Sun Saturn conjunction, having it at 28, almost 29 degrees of this sign, for which she has her rising sign, 29 Leo. She has Neptune at 28. She has Sun and Saturn at 28. So when I see a lot of 28, 29, I consider that a Saturnian type of degree. It's called anaretic degree in Western, but I feel that it's related to Saturn because Saturn has a 29-year cycle, and that whatever planet you have at that degree, you're pushing through a lot of you're moving a lot of big rocks out of your way. You're pushing through a lot of obstacles, and it takes a very, very long time to get there. But in the end, you get there. And in the end, you're like, wow, the feeling is so overwhelmingly, um, a feeling of gratitude and accomplishment, and knowing that you did the right thing in spite of all the obstacles, that it brings you, as you say, closer to your heart, your soul, your destiny, and like, okay, I did this, I was able to do this, but it's not an easy path.
Yeah, and I love how, I personally believe that so much of astrology is based on the astrologer's intuition being stimulated by the chart. And so I always love how, you and I can sit and we can look at two different charts, and a lot of people would say, oh, well, they're looking at different charts. So of course, they're going to come to different conclusions, but that's not really how it works, I've found, because the
Right,
intuition is going to guide us to the same general place, even if the
right.
details of the story we talk about a little bit differently.
Right. And I think this is a good place to end on. No matter what astrological technique you choose to study, I think it's how sharp is your lens. It's going to, and your intuition. And because I do feel that astrology, while it is a component of science, it uses mathematics and planetary cycles and orbital uh, periods that don't change. Those are scientific. You can't argue that this data provided here is where the planets actually were. There's no other way no other place they can be. So that's the science part of it. But the art of it is the intuition, the interpretation. How does each astrologer, what do they glean from each chart? And there are so many techniques out there today. There are hundreds of techniques that are being taught today in astrology. And I think a lot of it, you probably would need to rely on your own intuition in terms of what you resonate with. Okay, I want to study that. That appeals to me. But you're not going to come up with a really different answer than if you would have studied in that school over there. In the end, we all get to the same uh, destination.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah. So, well, so we have gone almost an hour, and we thought we would go a little bit less than that, but it doesn't matter. What it makes me realize is we need to have another conversation down the line somewhere about other topics. Maybe we just came out of a Mercury retrograde, but um, maybe during the next Mercury retrograde we can talk about your thoughts on Mercury retrograde as
Oh,
well.
that's a good topic. Love talking
Well,
about Mercury.
actually, Mars is going retrograde coming up soon, and there
Uh-huh.
will be a Mercury and Mars retrograde at the same time. So that's going to be such an interesting period, and such a sort of like a period of, wow, what's that going to be all about? What's that going to bring?
Right,
Because towards the
exactly.
end of the year, Mars goes retrograde, and then we're going to have another Mercury retrograde. So yeah,
It's gonna be
basically,
at first thought, it's gonna be a lot of pent up uh anger that's not gonna get talked about, but then there will be like a flood of something new. That's my guess. Like a
okay,
new way of talking about the same thing, but it had to
yeah,
kind of like boil inside for a while.
right, and that's good. So that's a good place to leave it. Um, So I'm going to say goodbye I'm going to stop the recording now. So I'm going to say goodbye to you all now, and tune in to us the next time around.